Streaming, start recording. All right, Shabbos, say good morning. My apologies for the few-minute delay. Let us begin. Begin by thanking our sponsors, our Talmud Torah sponsors for the month of Elul. Shindi and Avram Kelman, in honor of Yichil's engagement to Alana Falik, in memory of our parents, Jerome and Bernice Kelman, and Alexander and Federica David Alehem Hashalom. Barak, Maya, Sandy Hoffman, Dora Limas, and Avi Malamid for dedicating the Sherman Drushels this month in memory of Ruvain ben Emmanuel. Ayal and Sarah Steinberg for dedicating Shiurim and Drushos this month in the Schus of Refuah Shlema for Shulamis Bas Susha and the Schus of her continued health, the Daf Yomi Shir, and the Schus of Refuah Shlema for Yehuda ben Michal. We hope that under the merits of our Talmud Torah, all of those who require a refuah should have one with Kol Cholei Yisrael, all of the Neshama Shav and Aliyah, and the families Einacham. Rabbi, with that, let us begin. We have an absolutely incredible daf ahead of us today. Today's daf is Samech Aleph, 61. We are picking up in Meretz Hashem on Samech Amid Beis, 60b. We left off at Tan Rabbanon, which is 2, 4, 6, 8, 9 lines up from the bottom. And I will say again, just want to point out if you do notice, I know there were a couple of doubters last week if we were ever going to catch up with the international Daf Yomi cycle. And again, I just want to point out, Baruch Hashem, we are caught up, right? We're on the same daf as the rest of the world. Baruch Hashem. So let's begin. Tan Rabbanan. We'll see if we maintain that today, but that's a different story. Tan Rabbanan. Hari Shenasnu ben Lahanik. So I'll say, remember again, our topic today, well, at least the first part of our topic today, then we're going to switch gears in Meretz Hashem, is halacha l'maisa. The responsibility is outlined by the Mishnah that a woman has during marriage to go ahead and nurse her child. We then transitioned into a discussion regarding in the event of divorce, halacha l'maisa, what is the mother's obligation and what power does the father / ex-husband have in order to compel her to continue to nurse. We then transitioned from that topic into another topic regarding, well, what happens if this is a woman of means, right? Where halacha l'maisa, she could hire a wet nurse. We then transitioned into another topic where what happens, halacha l'maisa, something happens to the kid, right? Either the child is weaned, chas v'shalom, the child dies. So how does that impact everything? The way we came out, halacha l'maisa, at the end of yesterday's daf, was that there is a gzera d'Rabbanan. And the gzera d'Rabbanan is that a woman with a baby within 24 months may not remarry. And it's what we call a low plug. The Gemara compared it to which halacha? The halacha of havchana. No different than when a woman is divorced or widowed, she has to wait 3 months before remarrying in order to ensure that we have no paternity ambiguity. We know exactly who the father is. And that's true even if we know for sure beyond the shadow of a doubt that she is not pregnant. Halacha l'maisa, she has to wait. The Gemara seems to compare this din of the 24-month baby with the din of havchana. So the Gemara says this also. Now we're switching gears a little bit. We're talking now about a woman who is hired as a wet nurse. Very interesting. So if a woman was hired as a wet nurse, they gave her a child to nurse. Hare ze lo tinok imo lo bina v'lo ben chaverta. Fascinating. Halacha l'maisa, if a woman is hired as a wet nurse, that precludes her from nursing her own child and nursing her friend's child. The idea seems to be that if you're being hired out for this skill, you have no right to deplete your milk supply with any other babies, even your own baby or even your friend's baby. Paska kima, if they only gave her means, let's say the person who hired her, let's say the person who hired the wet nurse only allotted for her a small amount of food. Ocheles harbe, she eats a lot. We'll discuss what that means. Lo sochal imo dvar l'chalav. Furthermore, she has to be careful with her diet. In other words, if you're hired as a wet nurse, you can't eat things that have the ability to compromise the milk supply. So the Gemara goes back for a second. We'll say, what was the first halakha stated over here? That if a woman is hired as a wet nurse, she cannot go ahead and nurse her own child or her friend's child. So it says the Gemara, Hashta bina amrat lo ben chaverta mi boy. And we'll say, obviously, if you're telling me that what? That she can't nurse her own child, do you even have to say she can't nurse her friend's child? That's obvious. So what would you have thought? Benohu dechayis iluya mamsilotfei ava ben chaverte ilav dehavile mosar lo have mamsile. You don't have thought like this. Maybe the concern is only with her own child, because with her own child she may be tempted to go ahead and give her own child surplus milk. But her friend's child, she would only agree to nurse that child if she knew she had enough after her contracted nursing obligation. Kamash Malano. Kamash will say that halacha l'maisa, if a woman is hired to nurse someone else's child, she's hired as a wet nurse, that precludes her from nursing any other children, be it her own child or her friend's child. To which the Gemara goes weiter. Paska kima ocheles harbe mehecha. So we'll say, so remember again, the Gemara said, the Brisa said, let's say again, Rachel's hired as a wet nurse. And now what happens? She receives a wage and a food allotment. Let's say the food allotment is not enough. It's not enough to sustain her or to sustain her milk supply. So what's the halacha? She has to eat more. The Gemara says, that's fine, she has to eat more. We'll say, what's the shaila? We're Jewish. What's the shaila? Oh, good. Who pays for it? Right? So who pays for it? Mehecha, who pays for it? Mishelah. Ultimately, again, she pays for it. They're both saying, what's the pshat with that? What's the pshat? So ultimately, again, the Marashal explains it's very simple. The Marashal says, in other words, it doesn't seem to be fair that she should have to pay from out of her pocket. The Marashal says like this, it must be that she's getting paid enough money that it makes her worth her while to go ahead and agree to this agreement, even though she's going to have an outlay of funds to supplement her diet. In other words, if she wasn't getting paid enough money, then this whole thing wouldn't be worth it. The fact that she entered into this arrangement, knowing full well that she's not going to have enough food from this allotment, she's okay with that. Good. Lo tochal imo dvarim haroim. So we'll say she can't eat things that are bad for milk supply. So what are some examples of this? Amrav kahana kigon kashus are hops, chazis are wheat sprouts, dogim kitanim small fish, adama earth. Abaye amra filu kra v'chavusha. Abaye says even kra. Now we'll say kra is often, Rashi says over here, so Rashi has it as kora. Kra is often a gourd. So kora, Rashi says over here, is rach hagadol bedekel mashenosif ala anaf b'shanazu. Pieces of a palm tree. V'chavusha, chavusha is a quince. Rav Papa amar afilu kra v'kofra. Rav Papa says, even a krana kufra, Rav Ashi mafilu kamcha, the harsina, even kamcha, Rashi says kamcha is kusach. Kusach, that is a big loss. Right? She can't even eat kusach, the harsina. Harsina is fish hash. Let's remember again, when we were first introduced to harsina, remember the first time we met harsina? First time? In brachas. Right? Brachas already, harsina is there because of the discussion about what bracha you make on harsina. Remember again, how do you make harsina? It's easy to whip up a little harsina. I always say, so listen to this. It's very simple. It's fish kishkas with oil and flour. And you mix it all together, you fry that up. I heard it tastes just like chicken. Anyway, so the Gemara says as follows. So the harsina, right? Harsina, so she can't eat harsina either. So the Gemara says, Minayu pasku chalba, so minayu ochri chalba. Some of these foods totally stop milk supply, and some of them just diminish the quality of the milk supply. Incredible. The Gemara goes weiter. So we'll say now the Gemara transitions to something dramatically different. If a woman has relations and becomes pregnant when having relations by a mill, a grinding mill, ultimately she's going to have children who are epileptic. Okay? If a woman has relations while laying on the ground, she's going to have sons, Rashi says over here, Shamuti Aruche Tsavar Vehumum. Sons with children with long necks, and this is considered to be a deformity. The Darcha, so I will say, I just want to point out what's driving this. So I will say, Chazal felt that how a woman conceives ultimately impacts the nature of the child. And I will say, what I will point out is, here, the examples that are given over here are halacha l'maaseh examples of how a woman, in other words, how the act of relations takes place physically will impact physically the child. And I want to point out, this is not necessarily something religious in nature. In other words, this could just simply be reflective of what they thought scientifically at the times. What I will point out, however, is that there is a spiritual parallel. And the spiritual parallel ultimately is that what happens both b'machshava in one's thoughts And what happens ultimately spiritually during the act of relations also has an impact on a child. Not necessarily physically, but absolutely. So for example, the Gemara says that if when a man is having relations with his wife, he thinks about another woman, ultimately, again, that has a negative spiritual impact on the child. A child is conceived from a woman who is a nida, that has a spiritual impact on the child. So I just want to point out this is not necessarily something that Chazal are highlighting over here as something like religious. This could just simply be reflective, ultimately, again, of what they believed. But again, the spiritual parallel is very interesting as well. We'll say, essentially, the Musar Haskell is that everything we do has an impact. There is no such thing as an action or as a thought that is impactless. Everything we do. So again, here the Gemara is giving an example, even how a person has relations, what a person thinks about during relations. Right? Everything we do has an impact. Sometimes it's a measurable impact, sometimes it's an unmeasurable impact, but it's such an important way to live life. There's no such thing as an action we engage in, be it physically, verbally, cognitively, that does not have some type of impact on ourselves or on those around us. So the Gemara goes weiter. The Gemara says, Dadarcha al Rama dechamra, havole bane girdani. This is an interesting one. If a woman goes ahead, apparently when she's pregnant, and steps on donkey manure, ultimately she'll have bald children. I called my mother about this one, but we'll see. All right. The achla chardala havalu bani zalzule. Right? If a woman goes ahead and eats mustard, she has mustard seed. She's going to go ahead and have children who are gluttonous. The achla tichli, if she goes in and she eats cress, havuluhu bani dulfi. She's going to have dulfani. Rashi says over dulfani, enehem zolfos mayim tamid. Children with teary eyes. The achla monini. If a woman eats monini, what's monini? Rashi says horgal alechol dagim kitana. Monini are small fish. If she's used to eating small fish, then havuluhu bani metzitzi eina. She's going to have children with. Rashi says over here, Einav parchos v'naos tamid. So I will say, what this literally sounds like is children who ultimately blink often, a lot of blinking. Okay, the achla gargushta, if a woman eats gargushta, Rashi says over here, zadama is earth or clay. Havalu bani michuari. She's going to have ugly children. The shasya shikra, a woman drinks beer when she's pregnant. Havaluhu bani uchmi. She's going to have dark complexion children. The achla bisra is great. The achla bisra v'shasya chamra, if she eats meat and drinks wine, havale bani bari. That is a secret to success, right? I want to say, by the way, if you notice, Chazal had certain things that always work, right? The one thing that always works for anything in life is meat and wine. Right? It's a school for healthy children. It's a school for a happy day. It's a school for personal health. Incredible. The we'll say top of Samech Aleph, the achle bei, if a woman goes in and eats eggs during pregnancy, havulehe bani inoni. So what's inoni? Rashi says, a name gedolos. She'll have children with large eyes. The achla kavri, if she eats fish, havulu bani chinoni. She will have children who are Rashi says ba'ale chen. Right? Very, very. Now, I both say chen doesn't just necessarily mean physical beauty, but chen means a type of they'll find favor in the eyes of others as well. So I both say again. One thing I want to point out. So the Marshal says this as well. The Gemara is not trying to highlight over here that there's some type of spiritual quality associated with these items. That's not what the Gemara is highlighting. What the Gemara is highlighting over here is this is what they believed were the characteristics of these foods and ultimately the impact they have on pregnancy. This is very interesting. The achla karpesa havuluhu bane zivasni. If a woman eats karpesa, ultimately, again, she's going to have children with a good complexion. I will say, I want to show you something amazing. Because the word karpesa, you don't find karpesa too often in Shas, right? We find it here. The other place we find it ultimately, again, is in Arvei Psachim. So I will say, we know karpas. Karpas is part of the Seder. If you look at Rashi over here, Rashi says karpasa is apia. Apia normally is translated as potato. But I want to show you something amazing. If you look on the newer editions of the Gemara, they have Laze Rashi on the Dr. Gladstein, they do not have this in the Sonsino. They do not have this. I think Dr. Gladstein might be the last Sonsino holdout in Klal Yisrael. Right? You put that on eBay. You could retire on that. I think. So look at Rashi. Laze Rashi in the margin says Laze Rashi apya perish karpas apich silar selavi. So it's interesting. Laze Rashi quotes over here opinions that say karpas is celery. Rabbi said, I want to point something out which is fascinating, which is you may have seen that there are different minhagim what people use for karpas. So I think most commonly people use potatoes. But again, there are minhagim to use celery. If you ever wonder where in the world did people get celery from? Where did that come? That celery is karpas? Rabbi said, Kesuvos, Samech Aleph, Amud Aleph, Laze Rashi. Absolutely incredible. Here it is. So the Gemara goes weiter. Da'achla kusbarta havli bini bisrani. If a woman eats kusbarta, right, we'll say kusbarta is usually translated as coriander, she'll have children, right, larger children. Da'achla esroga, listen to this. If a woman eats an esrog when she's pregnant, havli bani reichani, she'll have children who are fragrant. It's beautiful, right? So again, children eating esrog. Esrog is a beautiful fragrance. Eat esrog. You have a child supposed to listen to the story. Parte de shavar malka achlu ba ima esroga. Listen to this. The daughter of Shavar Malka, when her mother was pregnant with her mother ate esrogim. And they would bring the child before Shavar Malka in front of all the fragrant spices. In other words, Shavar Malka's daughter smelled more fragrant than all of the spices in his kingdom. Why? What do they attribute that fragrance to? They attribute it to the fact that her mother consumed esrogim during her pregnancy. Quite beautiful. So we'll say now back to the nursing sugis. Am Rav Huna, Badak lam Rav Huna barachinina. So we'll say listen to the following case. He omeres lahanik, v'hu omer shelo lahanik. We'll say listen to this interesting case. You have a couple. They're married. They have an argument, right? So we'll say, so now listen to this. She says, I want to nurse my child. I want to nurse the baby. Husband says, we'll say this is a case where they're married, not divorced. Husband says, I don't want you to nurse. So we'll say, ultimately, again, why doesn't he want her to nurse? So Bepashtos, he's concerned that the nursing is going to diminish her beauty, right? So he doesn't want her to nurse. So what's the halacha? Shomin la. We listen to the wife. Sarah didahu. We'll say ultimately again, nursing, right? Nursing. Now, when do we say tzara dida? Now Rashi points out, what does it mean tzara dida? It's not the tzara of nursing. It's the tzara of what? Of not nursing. Right? If she doesn't nurse, she becomes engorged. If she becomes engorged, it's painful for her. So she has a right to say, I want a nurse to alleviate my own pain. Who omer lahanik, omer lahanik. Now here's interesting. What happens if the husband says, I want you to nurse the baby. She says, I don't want to nurse the baby. What's the halacha? Mahu. So kol heicha delav orcha shomin la. So I will say, when it is not the derech of her family to nurse. Let's say she comes from a family where normally, again, the women didn't nurse. They hired wet nurses. So if that's the family she comes from, then we listen to her. Or, so the Gemara says, shomin la, hi archa, v'hu lav arche. What happens, Rabbi say, if in her family the women do nurse, but in his family the women don't nurse? What's talacha? Mai, basar dede azlinan, ubasar dida azlinan. Do we go after his family, after her family? Upashitna le minha. We'll say we resolve this from here. Ole imo ve'eni yoredis. Rabbi says it's a very important halacha. When a woman gets married, she only goes up in lifestyle with her husband, never goes down, which Rabbi says is incredibly important. So a woman gets the better of both worlds. In other words, she goes essentially with the higher standard of living. So halacha l'maisa, if she comes from a wealthy family and he does not, when he marries her, he agrees to support her in accordance with the standard that she is used to. If he comes from a wealthy family and she does not, he agrees to support her in accordance with the standard of his family. So she always goes with the higher standard. So Rabbi say, what comes out for us practically in the nursing sugi is as follows. So first of all, case number one, whenever she wants to nurse and he doesn't want her to, we always listen to her. What happens if she doesn't want to, but he wants her to? Essentially, as long as one of the two of them comes from a family where the women normally or customarily hired wet nurses, she's good. She has a leg to stand on. If neither of them come from that kind of family, then halacha l'maisa she has an obligation to nurse. And both say, where does this concept of ola imo ve'ini yoredes imo, which means she only goes up in lifestyle with him, never goes down? Where does that come from? Rafuna Mikra, what's the pasuk that supports this? Vehi beulas baal, an interesting drasha. Right? Both say vehi beulas baal ba'aliyaso shel baal v'lo b'yiridaso shel baal. A little bit of a play on words. Vehi beulas baal aliyaso shel baal. She goes up with her husband, does not come down with her husband. Rabbi Lazar Amar Mehacha ki hi haisa im kol chai. This is great. By Chava, Rabbi say. Chava was the mother of all living things. Lechayim nitna v'lo litza'ar nitna. A woman is given over in marriage, right? The woman comes to her husband for chayim, for an enhanced lifestyle, not for a diminished lifestyle. Rabbi say, by the way, we accept this premise, halacha l'maisa. I know no one needs me to tell them that. Rabbi say, but again, this is actually put in the Kesuva, right? Where is this found in the Kesuva? That a husband agrees to support his wife, one word, bikushta. Bikushta means in comfort. What does that mean? So Rabbi say, when Chazal put that word in the Kesuva, that word reflects, bikushta means the higher of our two standards of living. So halacha l'maisa, Reuven marries Rachel. He puts in the Kesuva, agree to support you bekushta, with comfort. What that means is, look, if Rachel came from a wealthy family and Reuven did not, he agrees to support her with that standard. Rachel is not from a wealthy family, Reuven is, I agree to support you in that standard. One word, bekushta, captures this entire essence. Beautiful. So we'll say, now that the Gemara transitions a little bit, now remember again, we'll say, so the Mishnah went through the various domestic responsibilities that a wife has in marriage. But then, the Gemara pointed out over here, that if she brings in servants, then what's the halacha? The halacha is, the more servants she brings in, those take away domestic responsibilities from her. So for example, the Mishnah said, Hechnisa lo shivcha achos, if she brought in one servant to the marriage, lo tochanes v'lo ofeh v'lo mechabesas. She doesn't have to grind wheat, grind. She doesn't have to bake, and she doesn't have to do laundry. Okay, so the Gemara says like this, Hechnisa lo shivcha, hashara avda. Now, both say, here's what's interesting. What's interesting is yet, although she's freed from those specific responsibilities, she still has an obligation to what? To perform the other responsibilities. So the Gemara says, I v'teimolei, I lisich loch isisa. B'charikoi. Why can't she say, listen, I brought you in a maidservant. Let her do everything. Listen to this. Mishum da amar la, hat harcha ledidio ledida. This is interesting. The husband says to his wife, right? Reuven says to Rachel, listen, I appreciate you brought in the maidservant, but here's what's going to happen. The maidservant could take care of me and herself. Kamei didach man tarach. Who's going to take care of you? Reuven says to Rachel. Right? And I was well say, what the Gemara is saying is like this, and it's actually quite fascinating. The assumption is one person could only provide for the needs of themselves and one other individual. Right? That's the capacity. That's the capacity load, right? One person. So when Rachel brings in a maidservant, right? That's fantastic. What does that do? That maidservant now could take care of Reuven, and obviously the maidservant also take care of herself. So Reuven says to Rachel, we still need you to participate in the household. Why? Because Lemaisa, they're still your own needs. So therefore, although the maidservant can pick up part of the slack, you still have to participate as well. I will say, by the way, I'll point out from something amazing. Although it is not Mother's Day today, a Gemara like this helps you to appreciate the role of a mother. Right? Because Chazal are saying one person could pretty much only take care of themselves. Right? I could take care of myself and one other person. Now, every single man knows this lesson. Yeah, we're like, absolutely, right? That's my limit, right? Myself, one other person. Now, let's say the gadlus of a mother is that a mother has such a dramatically enhanced bandwidth, right? That she has the ability to go ahead and take care of so many more people, just more than herself and one other person, as many as need care for. That's what a mother has capacity to do. It's incredible. The Gemara goes weiter. Shtayim, if she brings in two maidservants, eina mevashal so eina menika. So we'll say, remember again, the way the Mishnah works is the more maidservants she brings in, obviously the lesser responsibilities she has. Bless you. So Shtayim, she brings in two maidservants. then in addition to the items I already took off her list, she also doesn't have to cook and she doesn't have to clean. Ha-sha'ara avda, but she still has to perform other responsibilities. V'teimole, why can't she say to her husband, Ailis l'cha isisa achrisi detarcha lididi ulidida v'chada lididach ulidida. So we'll say, so why can't she say, listen, I brought in now there are two maidservants. That's enough to take care of you, me, herself, yourself, everyone's taken care of. Because the husband, Ruvain says, but one second, who's going to take care of our guests? Now, I'll say, here's what's interesting. If you look at Rashi says over here, Orchei are Orchim Hamishtaim Shabbos HaChodesh. These are guests that stay for prolonged amounts of time. That's Orchim. Parchi, Rashi says, Ovrim Ledarcham, Lefish Makom Shiish B'nei Bayis Rabim, Noagim L'Sarech Ovrei Derech. So we'll say, Parchi are kind of this company that's in and out. And we'll say, what's the pshat? This is interesting. So apparently, the more domestic help one has, the more people that are in a house, the more such a hub of activity attracts travelers and visitors. So Reuven says to Rachel, now that there's you, me, two maidservants, there's going to be a lot of visitors. So now, even though now there are two maidservants, we still need you to help out in the house because of the visitors. Shalosh, if she brings in three maidservants, remember again, this is a building list. So obviously, if she brings in three, whatever she was exempt from the first two, and now in addition, she doesn't have to make his bed. Hasha'ara avda, but she still has to perform other forms of domestic service. V'teimolei, Ailis l'cha achrisi, la'archi uparchi. So now she says, now there's three maidservants, right? The three maidservants. So even for the guest, there's more than enough. Why should I have to do anything? The Amrullah, nafish b'nei beisa, nafish archi uparchi. The more people that are in the home, the more visitors. As they're both saying, visitors don't cap. Essentially, the more active a home is, the more it attracts visitors, which means there's more work. If that's the case, then Rabbi say, remember again, the Mishnah said that if she brings in four maidservants, she doesn't have to do anything. But if that's the case, that the more people in the home, right, the more guests it attracts, then even if you have four maidservants, you still have to work. This is interesting. The Gemara says, Arba kevan denefishi lehu misayin ahadadi. This is very interesting. Once you have a staff of four, Rabbi say, then what? I should say, once you have four maidservants, then what do you have? You have a staff. Mazel tov. You've now made it to the level where you have a staff, right? We should all be zocha. Right? See, and once you have a staff works collaboratively. And I will say, by the way, you hear what the Gemara just said? There's a very big distinction between four maidservants working individually versus four maidservants who become a staff. Wherever there is collaboration is a force multiplier. I will say, what an incredible Musar Haskell. It's true if you manage employees, right? Often, again, if a person in business, manages employees, so if you silo your employees, right? You do this, you'll get four different people working, but you have absolutely no collaboration. If you have no collaboration, you have no team. So what you'll get is the output of four individuals. Masha'en Kain. If you create a staff, if you create a team, everybody feels they're part of a synergistic unit. Certainly, Chazal tell us, you'll get so much more output than the output of four individuals. Suddenly, you'll get the output of a team. I both say, it's such an incredible yesod in anything. You can plug this in volunteering, plug this in anywhere, where people feel that they're part of something bigger. The net output of that growth, the net output of that group is so much greater than the sum of the individuals. The Gemara goes weiter. The Gemara says, it's very interesting. By the way, in all these cases, when we speak about Rachel bringing in maidservants, it doesn't literally mean that she has to bring in the maidservant. We're talking about a woman who has a dowry that is large enough to support for whatever number of maidservants, even though she didn't actually bring them in. Tana, nisalo, lo mishala. Furthermore, I will say, and this is very interesting. In other words, when we speak about a woman being exempt from certain tasks, that is even if she didn't actually hire the maidservants, but rather, again, if she has a dowry that's capable of supporting that level of staffing, she's also exempted. Not only that, but says she doesn't have a dowry, but she's saving money. once she saves money and has enough money to be able to go ahead and hire that staff, she also becomes exempted from these activities. Incredible. So we'll say the Gemara goes weiter. Arba Yosheves bekatadra. We'll say if she hires a staff of 4 maidservants, then what? She can sit back on her recliner and she doesn't have to do anything. Says the Gemara Yitzchak bar Chanina, Amar Rav Huna, Afal Isha Amru Yosheves bekadarta. Even though we said that now when she brings in 4 maidservants, she has no responsibility. She can sit on the recliner. Ava mozeges lokos. She should still go ahead and pour a cup of wine for her husband. I will say mozeges. In the Gemara, doesn't just simply mean pour. It means what? Dilute. They used to have wine concentrate. That's how you make a cup of wine. You take a little bit of wine concentrate and you mix it with water. So I will say, so she should still make her husband's cup of wine. Umatzas lo samita, and she should still go ahead and make his bed. And of course, she should wash his hands, face, and feet. That goes without saying. So again, what I want to point out there, what's the common denominator amongst all of these things? The common denominator also is these aren't tasks as much as they are signs of affection. Actually an incredibly profound Gemara, right? Leaving aside that obviously societal norms have changed, right? No wife is washing her husband's hands, face, feet. And even if a wife offers, a husband should respectfully decline. That's not the norm, right? That's not the appropriate norm in our contemporary marriages. But again, what I want to point out is something very interesting is Chazal are telling us, do you know what successful marriage is built on? One of the things successful marriage is built on is displays of affection. Displays of affection. Little displays of affection. So what does the Gemara say? Even though the wife went ahead and brought in 4 maidservants, she doesn't have to do anything. Pour your husband a glass of wine. Pour him a glass of wine. Pour him a glass of wine, that's it. Or make his bed so you know which way he likes his pillows. Something little that is a simple display of affection. I will say, by the way, and of course, whatever Chazal is saying in one direction applies in the other direction as well. The key to successful marriage is not in big birthday or anniversary gifts, right? That's not it. Birthdays and anniversaries come once a year. The small displays of affection that one spouse does to another, that gives the energy and the momentum and the feeling of love. Let's say, I guess if you would translate this contemporarily, a husband texts his wife, right? I love you in the middle of the day. And by the way, not the like emoji I LUV, you, right? If you're building a life with someone, have the derech eretz to actually write out the sentence, right? Capital I LOVE YOU, and put a period in there also. In other words, it's again just a phone call, a little something that just says, so Chazal telling us, okay, wife, you have a staff, you are freed from all domestic responsibilities, but you're not freed from building a happy, healthy, and loving marriage. And the way to do that are just small displays of affection. So the Gemara goes weiter. The Gemara says, I just want to point out to you, Kesuvos, as you know, as you mentioned many times, it's called Shas Katan. It's mini Shas. The reason it's mini Shas, I will say, is on one given daf, you could cover 5 different topics. That's what's happening over. I will say now, transitioning to Hilchos Nida for a moment. Watch this. It's incredible. So the Gemara says, Amar Rav Huna, Komolocho Sha'isha Osel Baila, Nida Osel Baila. In general, anything that a woman is obligated to do for her husband, like on a regular day, so a woman who's in nida is permitted to do for her husband as well. Chutz mimizigas hakos, except for pouring him a cup of wine. V'atzas hamitra, making his bed. V'archotzas panav yodav raglav, or washing his hands, his face, and his feet. So both say why? Because the same idea. Because these are acts of affection. When a woman is in nida, we don't want her engage in acts of affection towards her husband out of a concern that may lead to physical intimacy, which of course is punishable by karis when a woman is in nida. So the Gemara says, Furthermore, I will say it's actually interesting. The making of the bed is only considered to be an act of affection when when it's done in the presence of the husband. But if it's not done in the presence of the husband, then halacha l'maisa, it's not an act of affection. And therefore, even when a woman is in nida, if her husband is not present, she's permitted to make his bed. Incredible. Umaziga sakos. Ultimately, we'll say, and again, remember pouring of wine. So remember again, I will say, so here we pointed out that when a woman is in nida, she is not permitted to pour her husband a glass of wine or a glass of anything. The act of pouring for a wife to a husband is considered to be an act of affection. And therefore, when she's in nida, she didn't do it. She wouldn't do it. We'll say, first white line, look at this. Shmuel, michla fayfele dvisu biyada the smola. We'll say, when Shmuel's wife was in nida, she would pour for him with her left hand. So as we'll say, what she would do is, she would employ a shinui, so as to remind him that she is a nida, and therefore, again, this act of affection shouldn't lead to anything. Abaye manchala apuma de kuba. So Abaye's wife, when she was in nida, and she would pour him a cup of wine, what would happen? She would go ahead and leave the wine apuma de kuba by the mouth of the jug. Okay, Rava, Abe Sajja, Rapapa Ashar Shifa. So we'll say again, Rava, his wife would lead it again on the couch, the cup of wine on the couch by his head. Rapapa's wife would do it by the Sharshifa on the bench. So we'll say, interestingly enough, all of these women, when they were in nida, they would pour a cup of wine for their husbands, but they would employ some type of shinui to show that ultimately, again, they were in nida. Is incredible Gemara. Transitioning again. But say in general, person has a shamish, right? Well, a shamish, we're going to loosely translate over here as a butler waiter, right? So this is someone who is serving you and serving your guests during the meal. So Rav Yitzchak Bar Chanina says as follows. Rabbi say, we're going to now get into shamish etiquette. So I have someone now going ahead and taking care, right? Serving me and serving my guests. So Rav Yitzchak Bar Chanina says like this. In general, you could wait to feed the shamish until after everyone else is served, with the exception of chutz mi basar v'yayin, except with meat and wine. With meat and wine, you have to allow the shamish to eat at the same time as the guests. And I will say, the idea behind that is that what? That ultimately, again, when the shamish is serving a good piece of flesh, right, and fragrant wine, that's going to make him very hungry. And therefore, it's unfair to make him wait, right? It's cruel to make him wait until after the meal is done. Rather, give him to eat and drink right then and there. Rav Chisda says, by the way, but it only refers to basar shamein v'yayin yashan. But that refers to fatty meat, which I guess has a more fragrant aroma. Yayin yashan, old wine, which obviously has a more fragrant aroma as well. Rava says, basar shamein kol hashana kula. Basar shamein, that's true the whole year. Yayin yashan b'tkufas tammuz. Old wine is dafka during Tammuz when the scent is strongest. Amrav Anan Bar Tachlifa. Boss, here we go. Hava ka'imna kamei demar Shmuel va'isule tavshila de'ardi. Rav Anan Bar Tachlifa was saying like this. I was standing in front of Shmuel and they brought out a cooked dish of ardi. Ardi are mushrooms, a mushroom dish. V'ilav diyoivli, and had someone not given me a taste of that, istakni, I would have become dangerously ill. Shabbat saying, this is interesting. What the Gemara is describing over here is the ability to have such an intense craving that literally, if it's not satisfied, you could get sick. Say, we're used to hearing this in Chazal by who? Where do we usually find this discussion? Pregnant women, right? Again, I will say to the point. Remember, again, we saw Masechas Yuma. A pregnant woman craves something on Yom Kippur. There's a whole process. We give her to taste, we give her this. It's a whole process. But the Ma'aseh, the Gemara doesn't just apply to pregnant women. It can apply even to regular people. That didn't sound right? But I'm saying right? In other words, right, even when a woman's not pregnant, right? Even to non-pregnant people, right? So I will say, so again, lemaisa. So you see, cravings can become so intense. So here's the example of it. The Gemara goes, "Vayit Amar Vashi, ha'ava kamina kamid Rav Kana va'isule kardile delifta b'chala." Rav Ashi's one time I was standing in front of Rav Kana and they brought out turnips in vinegar. It doesn't even sound appealing, right? It doesn't, right? Turnips and vinegar, right? Bechala v'ilav diyoivli istachni. And had they not given me a little bit of a taste of it, literally, I would have been in sakana. Rav Papa Amra afilu tamra dahanunisa. Even a plump date. I want to say, the idea being is that sometimes cravings aren't rational. In other words, why did they bring up the plump date? Right? Because I will say, a piece of meat, I totally hear it. Even a mushroom dish, I could hear it. Already as we go on the list, turnips and vinegar, I don't hear it, right? A date But the idea is everything depends also. Maybe a person is starving, or maybe a person just. So the idea is cravings are very subjective. But the point over here is the Gemara sensitizing us to the idea that a person could have such an intense craving that literally it puts them in sakana. Here we go. Klala demilsa, kol de islei recha v'islei kiyar. We'll say anything that has a pungency or that has an aroma. Any food like that is capable of generating an intense craving. We'll say, get ready for this Gemara. Sometimes I wish we only had to do Amid Yomi, but again, sometimes we do only do Amid Yomi. But I'll say, but again, listen to this. This is wild. Listen to this. Avua bar ihi, umiyamin bar ihi. So listen to this. Avua bar ihi, brothers. Chad safi mikol mina umina. But say one of them used to make sure to give the waiter from every course. He would make sure that the waiter would get to eat from every single course. V'chad safe mechad mina. And one only gave the waiter from one course. So they both say, they were both makbid to feed their waiters, right, at the meal, prior to at the meal. But one was makbid to give the waiter from every single course. One was only makbid to give the waiter from the first course. Mar mishtay Elio bahadei, umar lo mishtay Elio bahadei. They both say one of the brothers, the one who gave the waiter from every single course, Elio used to visit him. The one who only gave the waiter from the first course, Eliyahu, did not visit him. Okay, well, so not finished. Hano Tartin Chasidi. There were these two Chasidim, two pious men. Formerly Rav Mori, Rav Pinchas, Bnei Rav Chisda. Some say it was Rav Pinchas, sons of Rav Chisda. Mar Kodim Safi, Umar Ma'achar Safi. One used to give his waiter to eat before the meal, and one would give his waiter after the meal. What I was supposed to say, by the way, doesn't mean after. I shouldn't say after the meal. It means after they served the guests. One gave his waiter right before he served the guests, and one gave his waiter right after they served the guests. So the Gemara says, "Man said the kadim safi Eliyahu mishtay ba'adei." The one who served his waiter right before the guests. Ultimately, Eliyahu used to visit him. The me'achar safi lo mishtay Eliyahu ba'adei. But the one who only fed his waiter after the courses, Eliyahu did not visit. I will say, isn't this absolutely amazing? I will say, I want to point out something. In both of these cases, these individuals are introduced to us as tzaddikim. So there's a tzaddik, right, which is a level, and then there's being worthy of a visit from Eliyahu Hanavi. So apparently, tzidkus by itself is not enough to merit a visit from Eliyahu Hanavi. So what does merit you a visit from Eliyahu Hanavi? Being a tzaddik and also being a Baal Chesed. Being someone, ultimately, again, who truly is an empathic and compassionate individual. I both say, and sometimes the way you see empathy and true compassion is not in big things, but it's in little things. And often the way you actually see it is in people who work for you. Right? I both say, you see a lot about people with how they treat hired staff. I both say, I'll just tell you something important. It is so important when you go to a simcha or you go, and there are people who are working. Let's say, it's always very striking to me. And I'll just mention this because I think you go to a simcha, a kiddush, a simcha, and there's people who are hired to work. And I will say, and often people who are hired to work, all different races, different socioeconomic things. And you ever take a step back and put yourself in their shoes for just a moment? Here, everybody else is having a great time. Right? They're at the carving station for the 17th time in 4 minutes, right? And they're making l'chaims and this, that. And meanwhile, for this person, it's a Sunday, it's a Saturday, they're working. I don't know what they get paid, but I'm sure it's definitely not a lot, right? It is so easy just to go ahead and go about your business and just say, I'll have this, I'll have that, and ignore their humanity. When you stop for a moment and you say a thank you, say a thank you. Or you say, how's your day? Right? How's your family? Enjoy the rest of the weekend. You take a few moments just to recognize the humanity of another person, just to exhibit a little bit of compassion to someone who is so easily ignored, right? They're being paid, right? You take a moment for that, that makes you Eliyahu worthy. That's when Eliyahu Hanavi comes to you, right? You need to be a tzaddik also. But l'maisa, again, that little additional piece of chesed that is so easy, but just as easy as it is to do, it's just as easy to overlook it. Those who take the time to go ahead and just Take care of this. Give the shamish something to eat. Give the waiter something to eat. Pull him into the kitchen. Before everything starts, make sure that when he's doling out the food, his stomach is not rumbling, looking at everyone else fressing, but he's going to get to eat. Just feed him first. Just feed him first. And then Avi says, that's the kind of person I want to visit. Person who says, thank you. Person who says, shalom aleichem. Person who says, how's your day? To the employees, I got it, they're an employee. You take the time to recognize someone's humanity, Eliyahu Navi comes to you. Such an incredible Gemara. Amir Amar Zutra. Ravashi. This is an incredible, get ready for this. Just gets better. Just gets better. So Amir Umar Zutra of Ravashi. Debe Asgar Malka. So let's listen to this. These Rabbanim, Amir Amar Zutra Ravashi, were sitting by the entranceway of King Asgur. King Asgur. Rashi says he was a Persian king. So they're at the edge of the palace. Get ready for this. Chalev ba'azal atorgina de Malka. So who walked by? The kings, I don't know what you call it. Rashi says Moshev Hamonos. The kings, we'll call it the head waiter, the head butler. And the head butler is coming in with like trays of food. He's coming in with about trays of food. Right? Chazi Ravashi the Marzutra. Ravashi looked at Marzutra and he saw Marzutra, Amud Beis, the Chavar Apeh. Marzutra grew pale. I was say, why did he grow pale? He saw the food and he became like seriously desirous of the food. The Rebbe say, now I want to point out for the here, right? They're not serving gefilte fish, right? At the Asgur, at King Asgur's palace, right? What are they serving? Tarfus, whatever it is, it's not kosher, that's for sure. So the food's going by. Marzutra is getting sick, he's craving it so badly. Yeah, ready? Shakal be'etz ba'aseh. So what happened? So again, Ravashi took his finger, stuck it in the food, anach leba pume, and he put it in Marzutra's mouth. So this is a pretty wild story. So what's happening? So can you imagine this? Right? Ravashi sticks his finger in the king's food. We'll say, what is he trying to do? This is tarfus. We'll say in halacha, there is the distinction between tasting and eating. In fact, again, there's an interesting machlokis in halacha. If let's say you're cooking something and you just want to taste, right? Either you're putting a little bit on your tongue or you're going to taste, spit it out. Do you have to make a bracha? It's a big machlokis. Rabbeinu Chanan al-Paskins that tasting does not require a bracha. So I would say, by the way, on a fast day, can you prepare food and just taste a little bit, not eating it, just taste it? Again, big machlokis in halacha. So here, Ravashi sees Marzutra is about to pass out. He needs to eat something. So what does he do? Now, it's tarfus. He tries to minimize the isser by what? Giving him a taste. And he hopes that just the taste will calm him down. Fine, it worked. Amrle, so we'll say, so now what happened? Amrle, afsarata l'sudasa de malka. So we'll say, now what happens over here? The butler says, what is the matter with you? Right? You just stuck your finger in the king's food. We'll say, do you know what happens when you stick your finger in the king's food? So number one is the king's not going to eat it. That's one. You just ruined this entire thing. So we'll say, now what happens? They call the palace police. So what? They call it amrule. So now it switches to plural. The palace police. They say to Ravashi, Amai to Avid Hachi, why did you do this? So Amar Lahu, Man da Avid Hachi Pasalam Eichel de Malka. Because the palace police say to Ravashi, if you stick your finger in the king's food, that's like a high crime. You just went ahead and validated the king's food. Amar Le, Amai Amar. So why did you do this? Amar Lahu. So let's listen to this. Ravashi says, Davar achar chazoy. I saw that there was some tsaras, there was some leprosy on the meat, and so I purposely stuck my finger in there so that the king wouldn't eat it. So badku la ashkechu. They inspected the tray, they inspected the dish, the meat that Ravashi had touched. They didn't find any tsaras. So what did Ravashi do? Shakal atzba'aseh. He took the butler's finger. Anachale. He put it on a particular spot. Amrluhu hacha mibat kisu. Did you check over here? Badku ashkechu. They searched, and sure enough, what did they find in that spot? There was saras. The saras, Shabbosai. So Ravashi went from villain to hero. Right, villain to hero. He was the one who saved the king from consuming leprosy-ridden food. So Amrle Rabbana. So Shabbosai, the Rabbana said to Ravashi, "My time was samchis anisa." Ravashi, there was no leprosy there. Right? There was no tsaras there. Obviously, the Moshe performed the miracle for you. So, but how were you able to be somech on the nace? So, Amar Lahu, Chazi Ruach Tsaras Tekaparcha Iluya. I saw ultimately again that there was like a spirit of tsaras hovering over Mar Zutra. So remember again, Mar Zutra was about to faint. I saw that there was like a spirit, whatever this means, a spirit of tsaras hovering around him, and therefore I felt that was the siman that I could rely on the tsaras excuse. So we'll say a profound story on many levels. But again, for our purposes, the reason why it's here, ultimately, again, we transitioned ultimately from giving your attendants to eat, to taste, to now this story about tasting. And there are many halachic ramifications of this story as well, but we don't have time for it. Here we go, weiter. There was a Roman official who said to a woman, "Marry me." Amri Leilo, she said, "No, I'm not marrying you." So we'll say, what did he do? It's interesting. Azl ceremony, Pali va'achli kama. So what did he do? Something interesting. He sat in front of her with a basket of pomegranates. And what happened? He peeled them and he ate them. So what happens? She wants a pomegranate. Kolmayid tsari la balase, velo havla. So I will say, so what happened? So now her mouth began to water for pomegranates, and she kept swallowing the saliva. Ultimately, again, as it accumulated, ad dizagle. Now I will say, apparently she became very sick, and as a result, ultimately, again, she became exceptionally bloated. Very sick as a result of this desire. So l'sof amrla imasina lach min sabas. So this is an interesting shidduch strategy. So he says to her, "Tell me, if I heal you, will you marry me?" Amrle in. She said yes. Azal ice ceremony. He brought another basket of pomegranates. Pali va'achli kama. He peeled them and ate them in front of her. Amrla kamayi desari lach tuf shadoi. He said to her, anything that accumulates in your mouth, don't swallow it. As the saliva accumulates, spit it out. Spit it out, spit it out. Adenaf kamina kihutza Yaakov estas, until something resembling a green palm shoot came out of her, and ultimately, again, she was healed. Incredible. So we'll say, let's go weiter. Again, we'll say, I want to point out, there's of course much to say on each of these stories, right? Chazal never include these type of maisalach just for entertainment value. They're here because, again, they highlight something. So we'll say, again, here's the next cycle, we'll get to it. Bitzamer in, so also Bitzamer, she works with wool. So we'll say, Bitzamer in b'pishtim lo. So apparently with wool, yes, but with flax, no. Masnisin Rabbi Yehudi Disanya. A man can't force his wife to serve his son, to serve his father, nor to put straw in front of his animal. But he could force her to give straw to his cattle. He also can't force her to go ahead and work with flax. Why? Because they'll say flax, the way you also is you have to put the flax in your mouth. It causes bad breath. And it causes the lip to swell. And this is dafka. What? This is dafka only with a type of Roman flax. So we'll have to stop over here for today. And we'll pick up here tomorrow. We're fine. We're absolutely fine. We're going to start a little earlier tomorrow. I'll send it on to the WhatsApp chat. We'll say, Shkayach, incredible daf. Have a wonderful rest of the day. All right, Chevron Zoom. Everyone have a great day. Great to see you. Reb Richard, safe travels.